Good evening all and welcome.
Before we begin tonight's video, I would like to wish Dad Joker a very belated happy birthday and Scooby a very happy birthday.
Tonight I have an absolutely disturbing selection of scary stories from babysitters. Some of the worst babysitters and some of the things that babysitters have seen that are absolutely disturbing. A very nice and spooky mix. We also have the absolute pleasure of being joined by the sensational Raven Reads in tonight's video. If you enjoy her work, you can find more by following the link down below or in the end credits. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. A couple of years ago, I babysat for a family friend who lived with her husband and their 2 kids, a girl around 7 called Kay and a boy of 12 called Jay. I babysat those kids so often that we became really close, almost like brother and sister. They were not difficult kids at all. Their home life was rough because their parents were borderline abusive, but the kids themselves were still good kids, and I always tried my best to be a positive adult in their lives. I was 18 or 19 at the time. The family moved constantly. I have known them for more than 6 years now, and they have moved every single year. This experience happened in 2015, when I was halfway through my senior year. They had just moved into a house that seemed pretty nice. It had been built in 2013 or so, and was in a good neighborhood, and the rent was strangely low. The mother loved talking about what a steal it was. To put it into perspective, the average rent in my area was around $1,200 just for an apartment, but they had gotten a whole 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms in a nice neighborhood for about $650. I thought it was odd and asked her if there was anything wrong with the house. She told me the inspection came back clear, so I didn't think anything much else about it. Once I started babysitting there, I immediately felt like something was off. I have anxiety, and going to new places always puts me in a weird headspace, so at first I just assumed that was all it was. The layout of the house mattered. Downstairs there was a living room, dining area, kitchen, and a few other rooms. I spent most of my time in the living room doing schoolwork while the kids were upstairs playing games or hanging out with friends. There was a wall that blocked the view of the stairs, so you could not see what was going on upstairs from where I sat. The parents' bedroom was immediately off the stairs and sat above the living room. That room was off limits to the kids. Past that was a loft area that looked down over the front door, almost like a grand foyer, and a light up there could be seen from downstairs. The kids' bedrooms were further down a hallway. At first, nothing happened that was so strange it made me think ghosts. There were little noises here and there, knocks on the walls, things getting misplaced, lights flickering, but nothing I couldn't talk myself out of. I figured they got what they paid for, and my memory was probably just bad. After a few months though, things started getting worse. The kids, who were usually very sweet and kind to each other, started becoming noticeably more snappy with everyone, especially Jay. He started complaining about nightmares where someone stood in his doorway watching him. His parents did not really listen, and their behavior only got worse as time went on. One weekend, the parents were going to be gone for a while. The kids were upstairs doing their thing, and I was downstairs in the living room looking at pizza to order for lunch. Out of nowhere, I heard really loud footsteps coming from the parents' bedroom above me. They were thunderous. At first, I thought it was the kids being little dingus meats, so I headed upstairs to tell them to get out. Instead, I found both kids standing in their doorway staring at the closed door to their parents' room, while the banging persisted from the inside. It was at that point I thought it had to be an intruder, so I told the kids to get into their rooms and lock the doors and dialed 911 and explained what was happening. While I stayed on the phone, the footsteps kept moving around the inside of the room. I could hear them shift from one side to the other. 2 officers arrived, so I grabbed the kids and waited outside while one of them escorted us out. They searched the house, but came back empty-handed. They said there was nothing there, that maybe it had been something with the door because the banging stopped as soon as they opened it. But I had felt the floor shaking, and the footsteps moved around, so I knew it was not just the door. Still in denial, I took the kids out for ice cream and tried not to think about it. Another time, the kids and I were eating dinner in the dining area. It was just the 3 of us in the house. From where we sat, you could see the upstairs light was on, and it cast a shadow onto the front door. I was joking about how I was the only one who knew how to turn a light off around there, when I saw what looked like a shadow of a hand from upstairs on the front door. That was the moment it really started sinking in that the house was haunted. The kids did not see it, and I didn't tell them. They had enough stress already. I mentioned it to the parents that night when they came home, but they had brushed it off and said they hadn't experienced anything themselves. The pattern continued for a while. I would experience something, the kids would experience something, but the parents wouldn't believe any of us. Then came the summer, right after I graduated high school. I remember it clearly because I was reading articles about a huge shooting that happened in my town when the banging from upstairs started again. I was used to the banging by that point, but I wasn't used to what happened next. The footsteps started coming down the stairs. They were slow and menacing, almost taunting, and the energy in the room felt awful, and even though it was the middle of the summer in the south, the air turned cold. I counted the seconds between each step, and it was 5 every single time. I called out to the kids, assuming, hoping, thinking they were messing with me. But I already knew it wasn't them, and was terrified. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't see who was there. Then, I saw an apparition of a little girl. She had brown hair and was wearing a red dress. She looked innocent enough, but the energy in the room was so heavy that I nearly vomited. She looked at me, and I looked at her. She didn't move. I thought I was hallucinating, so I rubbed my eyes, and when I looked again, she was right in front of me. My mind had gone into panic mode, and I hid underneath the blankets I was using, and I called the parents crying and told them to come back immediately. When they got there, the energy in the room lightened, and I finally withdrew from under the blanket. She was gone. They asked me what was wrong and what had happened, and I told them it didn't matter because they wouldn't believe me. I told them they needed to find another babysitter because I would not be returning. I still wonder about those kids. I hope they ended up okay. I know they moved out of the house at the end of the year, but I do not know whether what I saw was attached to the house or to them. Honestly, I still can't say for certain. This happened a very long time ago, back in the year of 1973. I was 6 years old, and we were living on Monica Lake in Madison, Wisconsin during the summer. I vaguely remember parts of it for years, but I never really connected everything until a few months ago when I was talking to my mum, and she went into it in a lot more detail. I was a very outgoing kid. I made friends with just about anyone. Our neighbor was middle class, and 3 houses down from us on the same side of the street was a huge park. My mum was a nurse and dad a salesman, and mum worked second shift at Meritor while my dad worked days, so I did not usually have a babysitter unless they went out for dinner or a movie. Even then, there were always older kids around the neighborhood who could watch me. One sitter I really liked was a girl called Vicky. She lived a few blocks away down the street a little bit. My mum thinks she was around 19 or 20, though I'm not completely sure. She remembers that Vicky was not in school and worked as a clerk in a store. She had babysat me before, and nothing unusual ever happened. She'd play games with me, do my hair and dress me up, just normal babysitter stuff. Then one day, I went down to the park with some friends. I remember there was a ball field and a sand lot next to it. My friends wanted to play on the monkey bars, but I wanted to play in the sand. When I looked over at the sandbox, I saw Vicky standing there. I told my friends I was going down there and ran off. We played in the sand for a while, building a castle. Then she asked if I wanted to go get something cold to drink. It was really hot, so of course I said yes. She took my hand and started walking me towards her place. On the way, she told me about her puppies and asked if I wanted to come and play with them. I got very excited immediately and could not wait to get there. And this is where my memory stopped for years. A few months ago, talking with my mum and sister about some of the places we had lived, we got to Monica Lane, and I mentioned that I remembered the park and how huge it felt to me, and my mum asked if I remembered being kidnapped. At first, I thought she was joking, but then I saw in her face she was dead serious. She told me it was around 5 in the afternoon when one of my friends came to the door looking for me, assuming I had gotten bored and gone home. When my mum checked the house and realized I was not there, she was 7 months pregnant with my sister and took off running to the park screaming my name. She asked a bunch of the kids if they had seen me, but none of them knew anything. She then went to the ball field and asked some of the older boys if they had seen me. One of them, maybe 14 or so, said he had seen a younger woman playing with a little girl who fit my description in the sand, then walking off in a general direction. And that was all he knew. My mum ran across the street to someone's phone and called the police. By the time the officers arrived, my dad had gotten home and some of the neighbors were already trying to help her search. There was this whole search going on, with people yelling my name and knocking on doors. The police went back to the park and asked the boys again if they remembered who the woman had been. Between what the boys said and what the neighbors remember, they were able to figure out who had taken me. I do not know how, honestly, but they did. The police and a group of people went to Vicky's house. She lived with her parents, but they were not home. They knocked on the door, and she answered, saying she had not seen me and that she had been home all day. The officers asked if they could come in, and for whatever reason, she obliged. They searched the house and found me in the basement. That's all my mum knew at the time, and when she told me, everything came rushing back. It felt like a floodgate had opened and I started crying. I can still remember the feeling of being 6 years old and trusting everyone. She had been in our home. My parents had no reason to suspect her, but the minute we walked into her house, I remember this horrible cold feeling washing over me. I suddenly became very afraid and kept saying I wanted to go home. She brought me into the kitchen and gave me a glass of water and a tissue. I heard dogs barking nearby, and next to the kitchen there was an open stairway leading down to the basement where the barking was coming from. She started trying to talk me into going downstairs, telling me there were toys and games down there. I didn't want to go, but she kept pushing. Eventually she grabbed my hand and led me towards the stairs. The dogs were going absolutely insane by then, and I started screaming. They were huge Rottweilers, and to a 6-year-old they looked like hellhounds. That was when she completely changed. She started yelling at me to shut up, screaming at me that if I wasn't quiet she would throw me in the cage with the dogs and they would eat me. She kept dragging me downstairs while yelling at me the whole time. I was terrified, beyond anything I had ever felt. I was crying so hard I could barely breathe, and I was screaming so much no sound was coming out of my mouth. Then she flipped like a switch, suddenly became syrupy sweet again, trying to calm me down, told me she was only playing a game, and said she wanted to play hide and seek. Whatever she did, she must have been very good at calming me down, because the next thing I remember was hearing knocking at the door upstairs, that I had stopped crying. The houses in the neighborhood were all the same tract-style homes that Sears used to sell, not huge, not tiny, but you could hear everything in them. I kept hearing the knocking, and she told me it was her friends. She said they had come to play hide and seek as well. Then she convinced me to let her to put masking tape over my mouth so I wouldn't make noise, and she lifted me into this big wooden box next to the kennel. She put a pile of blankets over me and told me to stay quiet so they wouldn't find me. The whole time the dogs were going crazy, but after she calmed me down, they settled a little too. They still looked mean, and they were still growling, but they were no longer frothing at the mouth. Then the knocking started again. I remember sitting in that smelly box, confused and scared, convinced the dogs were going to get out and eat me. I started crying again and hyperventilating, and at some point I pulled the tape off my mouth because I couldn't breathe, but I remembered I had to stay quiet because I was afraid of what she'd do if I screamed. I was sweating, crying, and curled up next to a big bag of dog food with the smell of mildew and damp basement air all around me. I pushed the blankets aside just enough so that I could pull them back over myself if someone came. I remember thinking about my dad and wondering if he would come to find me. Then I heard what sounded like adults yelling my name upstairs. The dogs started barking wildly again over and over, and I heard men shouting for me. At one point I heard one of them yell that if he could not shut those dogs up, he would. I was in a large storage box like a carpenter's toolbox with tape still hanging off my mouth. When they opened the lid, a very kind man asked me my name and if I was okay. I don't remember answering him in any real words. I was just screaming and crying and grabbing onto him so hard that my dad practically had to pry me off. After that, my parents took me to the hospital to get checked out, and that's all I remembered. My mum told me that Vicky was found guilty of attempted kidnapping. She took a guilty plea in exchange for a lesser charge so that I would not have to go through a trial, and because of my age I apparently would not have been a strong witness anyway. My mum believed she got a decent sentence, though she couldn't remember exactly how long. The last she knew, Vicky was in prison. I also remember that my parents were told Vicky's parents were odd, but they did not really know them. She had been recommended by neighbours who had used her as a babysitter, and nothing bad had ever come up before. She lived about 2 blocks over and 1 block down, and my parents said they never picked her up. She always walked over, and they would drive her home afterwards without noticing anything strange. The only time my parents met her parents was after the arrest, when they came to our house looking for forgiveness, saying Vicky had not meant to do anything bad and was a good girl. But my dad was furious. My mum said he grabbed Vicky's father by the shirt and told him that if they ever returned to our property again, they would be finished. I remember Vicky's name and some of what she looked like, but I would not know her if she were walking up to me today. It has been more than 50 years now. It happened in a large metro area where crime was common, so I'm guessing it did not get much attention outside of the neighborhood because I was found so quickly. Since my mum connected all the pieces, I have asked other family members about it, and they have confirmed their own memories of what happened. I can tell you exactly where it happened and what the inside of her house looked like, and I remember the smell of the dog food and how damp the basement was, and the mildew smell from the blanket she piled on me. Honestly, I think that smell is probably why I am so particular with how my laundry smells to this day. I used to babysit for a single mother who lived down the road. She was going out with her new boyfriend, and I was looking after her son. He was a sweet little 5-year-old who was extremely timid. At the time, I was 15. The evening started off just fine. We decided to do some arts and crafts, and he suddenly jumped up to grab a pair of scissors from somewhere in the room. He came running back with them, and I told him to slow down because he should not run with scissors. I barely got the words out before his face crumpled. He dropped the scissors, began sobbing, and turned towards the kitchen like he had already accepted he was in trouble. I didn't know what was going on, so I followed him, and asked him what on earth was the matter. Still crying, he pointed at the drawer, and after a few broken words finally managed to say that it was in there. In the silverware drawer was a large knife, and I could see what looked like little flecks of blood on it. Then I noticed he had taken his pants off. His legs were covered in cuts. Some of them looked old and scarred over, and some of them looked fresh, only a day or two old perhaps. And that was the moment everything in me changed from confusion and fear to horror. It was apparent that his punishment had been being cut for any small transgression. I shut the drawer, knelt down, told him I was sorry and that I would never hurt him. I told him to put his pants back on, and it took maybe 20 minutes to calm him down enough to believe me. But the crying didn't stop. He was half convinced I was testing him or tricking him somehow. I kept reassuring him that I would not cut him. Once he finally settled, I got us some treats. I let him pick a TV show and sat him on the couch. Then I told him I needed to make a quick phone call, but I would be right around the corner and back as soon as I could. He agreed, and I called the police non-emergency line, so I knew it would take a while. I also told them he was still very shaken and that I wanted to hang up and go back and sit with him. Before I went back, I deadbolted the doors just in case. That ended up being a good decision because his mum got home before the police did. I gave the boy my Discman and headphones and sent him upstairs so he wouldn't hear what was about to happen. Then I went to the front door and told her she wasn't getting in until the police arrived. And she completely lost it. She screamed at me, pounded on the door and yelled for the boy to let her in or it'll happen. Then she went around the house, trying every other door she could find. Just as she picked up a brick and moved towards one of the windows, the police pulled into the driveway. She dropped the brick and ran to them in hysterics, claiming I was threatening to hurt her son and was doing horrible things to him. I opened the door and stepped out. The officers told me to stay exactly where I was, and one of them came up and grabbed a hold of me. I did not resist. I explained what had happened, but halfway through the mother started screaming that I was a liar and that I had hurt the boy. One of the officers managed to get her to stop yelling long enough to keep me talking. After they listened to both sides, they told me I was going to be cuffed and put in the cruiser until medical services arrived to check on the child. I was able to convince them that the mother and son should not be left alone together, and the mother kept raging the whole time, saying they already had the culprit and should just leave and throw the book at me. When medical arrived, they examined the boy. I was released with apologies, and the mother took my place in the cruiser. All of that, and I didn't even get paid. But I am, all the same, glad of what I did, and I hope the boy, wherever he is now, is better because of my choices. At age 12, I started babysitting for family friends who had 3 daughters from ages 4 to 7. They lived in a cul-de-sac where nearly every home housed a young couple with children in elementary school. The neighborhood was extremely close-knit, like the 1950s American block party communities. They had a communal policy on using one another's toys. Any kid could use a play structure in someone else's yard at any time without asking. Shortly after I started working in the neighborhood, they revised the rule to any time a family is not using a babysitter to watch their kids. To ensure I would not get overwhelmed supervising a swarm of kids I wasn't paid to watch. It was thus more or less known when parents were going out and leaving someone else in charge of their children. I was welcome to take the girls to play in any other yard as they wanted. Their parents gave me permission to let them play in someone else's yard or sandbox independently if I needed to take a short break. Being an avid babysitter club reader, I didn't leave the girls outside unsupervised, ever. I would wait until someone else wanted a water or bathroom break, and then corral everyone inside temporarily. Similarly, when the girls wanted to play in the treehouse owned by an older couple a few doors up the street, I climbed up, despite a slight fear of heights, and crouched in the little house with them despite the feeling of claustrophobia, to follow my own rule. I don't recall whether my everyone inside, everyone outside together rule preceded the first odd interaction I had with the immediate next door neighbor or not. But when the police questioned the girls I babysat years later, they said nothing bad ever happened when I watched them, because I set up that weird, but sometimes annoying, rule. One day while playing basketball with the girls in the driveway, the next door neighbor came outside in a baseball cap and sunglasses and sat down on his second-story deck to read a paperback. I later noticed he'd turned his chair around 180 degrees to face us and the basketball hoop. I couldn't tell if he was looking at us. He had no reaction to me staring at him, flipping pages in the book like someone would while reading. The behavior repeated every time we played basketball for the 5 years I watched the girls. Eventually, once I noticed him in the chair, accessories on, I would suggest a game we could play inside or in their front yard in order to be out of view. This strange neighbor was familiar to me as he went to my church. I have never seen someone kneel in a pew, head bowed and hands folded, with the same level of intensity before or since. Once my family was seated, behind him, the priest came over to ask me to lead the children's mass during the homily, because the usual person was out sick. This guy turned around and glared at me, like I personally set out to interrupt his prayer time. When I worked in the church nursery during various masses, I would often make eye contact with him as he waited in line. Outside the nursery door to the restroom, from what I gleaned from our family, friends, and other people in the neighborhood, the odd basketball observer was a nice guy who gave up his apartment and job in the city to move in and care for his very sick, elderly mother. Since everyone thought he was great, and since he went to church as this was before the Catholic sex scandal broke out, I figured I was in the wrong for finding him creepy. Even as young as 12, I was used to guys in their 40s and 50s asking me to go somewhere with them or driving by slowly as I walked, biked, or jogged and made lewd comments. I figured I was projecting those experiences onto this awkward, quiet guy who had objectively not done anything wrong yet. For instance, I was certain that if the guy next door was a creep, he would not miss the opportunity to watch with his sunglasses on and book in hand while the kids and I went swimming each summer when the family opened their above-ground pool. Yet he never set foot on the deck when the kids and I donned swimming costumes to play in the pool or backyard. I was more convinced I was conceited and mean. Then when I was age 16, I caught him looking in the window as I cleaned up after movie night. The girls and I put on a film after bath time, and instead of watching it theatre style in total darkness, we kept some lights on so I could braid the girls' hair. The big screen TV we used for movies was located in an addition on the house with floor-to-ceiling windows. Though my parents were OCD about shutting blinds and curtains when the sun went down to prevent people from seeing in, our family friends had no window treatment on the big, modern windows. When I turned off the last light in the room, a floor lamp right next to the window facing the neighbor's house, I could see in the darkness outside where the weird man sat on his deck in a chair, in line with the window I was looking through. I looked over my shoulders and realized he had a line of sight on where the girls and I sat on the floor during the movie. As I looked back towards the house, I glimpsed him hustling inside. I would have doubted if I'd seen him at all had he not left the chair in an unusual spot. After watching him turn the chair around to read during many a baseball match, I knew where the chair sat that night, facing the window into the family room. It was not the chair's usual position on the deck. After that incident, I would suggest playing board games in another room, or insisting on watching movies theatre style to ensure he could not peep on what we did at night. Once the girls were asleep, I avoided the family room entirely because I was paranoid about being watched. If I wasn't in the kitchen doing homework or reading away from all the windows, I'd walk around the original first floor footprint of the house where all the windows had curtains. The first time the parents noticed my change in routine, they insisted I could watch TV or movies in the family room. I didn't mention anything to them because I was worried my concerns were silly and conceited. When I was 17, my family heard an evening cable news story about a man in our town caught in a police sting operation in which a woman pretended to prostitute her 2-year-old. Then they raided his house. The police found a ton of CP on his computer. Our family friends called a few weeks later. They wanted to know how I knew the young man next door to them was not safe. He was the guy I'd heard about on TV. As they described it, the police found his blog, where he wrote about his obsession with one of the girls who lived next door to him. It detailed his fantasies involving her and his plans to act on them. Things like lying in the treehouse for hours, hoping to corner her when she climbed up to play alone. Many of his entries focused on taking advantage or of kidnapping the girl while the babysitter was in charge. In his head, babysitters were like the ones in old movies, talking to friends on the phone or making up with a boy they invited over instead of caring for the children. As it became clear I did neither one of those things, his plans evolved to killing the babysitter, taking the girl, and getting out of Dodge. After talking to the girls to ensure they were not victims, the police suggested I might know something to have acted the way I did. All the pieces, the frequent run-ins at the church when I had children in my care, all the weird things he did when I knew he was watching the kids next door, all fit together cohesively. I was relieved. I was not mean-spirited nor imagining things. I was perhaps conceited. The focus was not on me, but on the children. At least I wasn't crazy. I recognize I was not the person most at risk in this situation, and yet, suburb pedo and would-be murderer, let's not meet again.
The voice on the stairs. The babysitting job sounded easy enough. One kid, already asleep, in an old house just outside of Asheville, up in the hills where the roads twist and the fog settles early. The parents were going to a late dinner, maybe drinks after. I'd be there 4 hours, 5 at the most. They warned me about the stairs before anything else. Just watch your step, the dad said. They're original, bit uneven. That tracked. The house had that look. Not abandoned or neglected, just lived in for a long time by different people who each changed something small. You didn't really question a door that opened into a short wall or a hallway that narrowed for no reason. The kid, we'll call her Emma, was 4. Like I said, she was already asleep when I got there. I stood in her doorway for a second, just to get a sense of things. Nightlight was on, stuffed animals lined along the wall. The window cracked slightly, letting in that cool mountain air. Normal. The parents left at about 7:30. Their car disappeared down the gravel drive, and the quiet came in behind it. Not silence, but houses like that always have some kind of baseline noise. Wood settling and air moving through the vents. Something shifting just to remind you that it's not empty. I locked the front door and checked the back. And then, just like they'd showed me, I set the alarm. The control panel beeped and then went still. I took up a spot on the couch where I could see the base of the staircase. It wasn't really intentional, it was just kind of where I ended up. But after a while, I noticed that I kept glancing over there. The stairs curved halfway up, cutting off the view of the second floor, So you could see like the first 6 or 7 steps clearly, and then nothing past the turn. The upper hall stayed hidden. Around 8, I heard a step. It wasn't super loud or anything, just the weight of something pressing onto wood and then easing off. I looked up right away, but I couldn't see anything. The hallway light upstairs was off. I waited and listened in that sort of strained way you do when you're trying to see if you were just making things up. The house settled again. The pipes ticked somewhere in the walls. I told myself it was just that. Old wood and temperature shift. Happens all the time. I went back to my phone, and a few minutes later it happened again. This time it sounded higher up, past the bend. I stood up. "Emma?" I called, keeping my voice light. "Are you awake?" No answer. I walked to the base of the stairs and looked up. The angle still cut off the top, but I could see enough to know that nobody was standing on the lower half. "Hey, Em," I tried again. "You need something?" Still nothing. I didn't go up right away. I waited. I kind of expected something else to explain it, I guess, but when I got nothing, I finally did go up. Every step had its own sound. I moved slowly. I wasn't exactly scared, but if she was still asleep, I didn't want to wake her up. At the turn, I stopped in my tracks. The air felt really cold. I leaned enough to see the hallway, which was empty. Her door was closed. I walked down and eased it open. She was exactly how I'd left her, curled on her side and breathing steadily, one hand wrapped around a stuffed rabbit. The window was still cracked and the nightlight was still on, so she hadn't been up. I closed the door quietly and stood in the hall for a second, and then I went back downstairs. I couldn't figure out what I had heard and why all these strange things seemed to be happening. But then I could write them all off too, so I did. Finally, I felt stupid for reacting at all. And then I heard it again. A step and another. Not random this time, but measured, like somebody walking down. At this point, I was already back downstairs. I froze, and the sound stopped just before the bend. I could see the lower steps clearly from where I was, though, and they were empty, but I could hear something just out of sight. The next step came slower. "Emma?" I said again, quieter now, and then I heard her answer. "Yeah?" It came from upstairs, soft and a little groggy. Exactly how a 4-year-old sounds when you wake them up. "Hey," I said, letting out a breath. "Did you get up?" "No," she said. It was the same tone in the same place, but something about it just didn't ring true to me. The stairs were still empty, though. "Can you come down here?" I asked. There was a pause and then, "Okay." I watched the steps. Nothing appeared, but the sound came anyway. One step, and then another, like small feet finding their way down. I felt my throat tighten. "Emma," I said louder now, "stay in your room, I'm coming up." The sound stopped immediately. I took the stairs 2 at a time, heart pounding out of my chest. At the top, the hallway was empty and her door was still closed. I pushed it open. She was asleep. There had been no shift in her position or sign that she'd moved. I could not figure out what was going on. The air felt different, like the space had been occupied a second ago and hadn't quite settled back. And then I heard something behind me. "Okay." The same voice in the same tone. Close enough that it should have come with breath against my neck. I stepped into the room and shut the door hard. I locked it without thinking, which I'm sure was really weird to Emma, who woke up and said, "You loud." "I know," I said. "Go back to sleep, I'm sorry." And just like that, she did. I stayed there for a while and I texted the parents. "Hey, not to be weird, but has Emma been sleepwalking lately?" The reply came a minute later. "No, why?" Before I could answer, another message came through. "She talks in her sleep sometimes, though." I stared at that for a second. "What does she say?" I typed. A pause, and then usually just repeats things she hears. Something tapped lightly against the door behind me. It wasn't a knock, it was like a fingernail testing the wood. It came again a little higher. Then her voice right on the other side. "Lila?" It used my name perfectly. "Can you come down?" It said. Almost the same cadence I'd used earlier and the same words, but mocking almost. The parents came home earlier than planned, thank God. I heard their car and voices and the front door opening, and then everything stopped. I waited until I heard them on the stairs before I unlocked the door. I didn't tell them all of it, just enough to sound concerned without sounding, unstable. They listened and nodded and thanked me. The mom hesitated before I left. "Sometimes," she said, careful with her words, "we hear her moving around when she's asleep. On the monitor, I mean, sounds that don't always match what we're seeing." I asked what kind of sounds. She looked toward the stairs. "Footsteps," she said.
About 2 years ago, right around Halloween, I was babysitting for 2 women who each had a young son. They were close friends and wanted a night out together, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched the boys. It was a regular quiet evening. The boys were watching cartoons, sitting on the couch with their iPads, and around 8 p.m, someone knocked on the front door. It wasn't a friendly, casual knock either. It was very slow and deliberate, and it made all 3 of us turn to the sound. I asked the boys if they were expecting anyone, and both of them shook their heads. So I walked to the door and checked through the peephole. There I saw a man standing in a grey hoodie, hunched forward in a way that made it impossible to see his face. His head dropped low, shoulders rounded like he didn't want to be identified, and the longer I stared at the blank hood, the more every instinct in my body told me to not open the door. I backed away and didn't answer or make a sound, but began pacing quietly, trying not to let the boys see how unsettled I was. I didn't want to give whoever was outside any hint that we were home. No lights turning on, no voices, nothing. A minute or 2 later, I carefully peeked through the side window, lifting the curtain just enough to see outside. Thankfully, he was gone. The empty porch somehow felt worse than seeing him there. The boys asked who it was, and I told them it must have been a prank, probably kids messing around before Halloween, nothing serious. There were no more knocks, or footsteps or anything. Eventually the house settled into that uneasy quiet again, and I tried to shake it off and finish out the night without scaring them. Hours later their mums returned, buzzed and laughing, carrying takeout containers, and the moment they stepped inside they asked how everything had gone. I told them the boys were great, but someone had come to the door earlier. They froze and asked me what time. Around 8, I said casually, expecting them to shrug it off. Instead, one of them immediately pulled out her phone and started scrolling with shaking hands. She told me that right around that exact time, they had both started getting strange phone calls from a blocked number. Someone had disguised their voice low and distorted and said things like, "I can see you through your window." At first, they assumed it was a dumb prank because the location didn't match, they weren't home, and the restaurant they were in had no windows near the table. But now, standing in the foyer of that house, they were almost certain the caller hadn't been talking about them. He was talking about me. They walked me to my car, scanning every inch of the street and driveway like they expected the man in the hoodie to be lurking nearby. I locked my doors the second I got inside. I checked in with them afterwards, and thankfully nothing strange ever happened again. No knocks or calls or shadows at the door. But I do wonder about that night. What might have happened if I'd have opened the door, and what that guy had planned. My colleague was newly married and asked me last year if I'd babysit her daughter for a few days while she and her husband went on their honeymoon. I'd babysat the little girl plenty of times before, but this time she was oddly insistent that I stay overnight in the house instead of going home after putting her daughter to bed like I normally did. I hesitated. I was newly engaged myself, and the idea of being away from my fiancée for several nights over something that had never required sleepovers before just felt weird. But she seemed anxious and really needed the peace of mind, so I agreed. I packed an overnight bag and planned to stay in her stepson's room, but I only lasted one night. Getting her daughter to sleep was the first sign something wasn't right. She was terrified of being alone in her room, far more than the usual kid bedtime jitters. It took 2 hours of calming her down, reassuring her, letting her keep the hallway light on, and sitting next to her, quietly talking until her breathing finally settled. She clung to me in a way that told me this wasn't new for her. Something had been scaring her for a while. And when she finally fell asleep, I headed to the next room, expecting to knock out easily. But instead, I lay there in bed with this unmistakable feeling, like something pressing on me, and I hadn't experienced it since living with my own parents. The sensation of being watched. It wasn't imagined, and not paranoia, and I could feel the creeps crawl up my spine. The longer I stayed still, the stronger it got, and that's when I began to hear sounds. Soft knocks, a couple of loud bangs, sharp enough that I actually sat up. I tried rationalizing it. It was a big house with unfamiliar noises, just me and a little kid. My mind was probably filling the gaps. But even as I tried convincing myself I knew better, I knew from the very first hour that something about her house felt off. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called her and told her gently but honestly that I couldn't stay there another night. I'd happily still watch her daughter, but at my place. I'd stop by her house to check on her pets, but I wasn't sleeping under that roof again. She did not argue. She didn't even seem surprised, just said it was fine. A few days later, I accidentally overheard her talking with her dad. She said she wanted to sell the house. She mentioned that the other night, while lying in bed, she felt someone walk around her room, actual footsteps circling her bed. Then her jewelry stand suddenly rattled, and her necklace moved like fingers had run across them in a single deliberate sweep. She thought maybe it was her mother-in-law who had recently passed away. The house had been hers after all. I finally spoke up and told her what I'd felt during that night, how intense it was, and I reminded her that my experience happened before her mother-in-law died, so whatever I felt couldn't have been her. Hearing her side of things made me realize I wasn't imagining any of it. I wasn't being dramatic. There certainly was something in that house, and it had been there long before she inherited it. And then tonight happened. I've been dog-sitting for them while they're out of town again, this time with my kid along, since I refused to stay in this house alone. After feeding the pets and locking everything up, I walked towards my car. Just as I reached it, a single loud bang, solid, slammed against the garage door. It wasn't the pets, as they were crated far from the garage. It wasn't the wind, as the air was completely still. It sounded like someone hit it hard right on the other side, as if trying to get my attention before I left. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was something. All I know is that every time I step foot inside that house, the same unsettling feeling returns, and I'm certain whatever lives here hasn't gone anywhere. This takes place in the mid-80s. when I was a preschooler in Alabama. My parents were both DJs at a local Christian radio station in Birmingham at that time, and my sister was in kindergarten. So my parents were in need of childcare for me. I was 4 and not in school yet. They really couldn't afford much in the way of a sitter, so they hired someone they knew and thought they could trust. The teenaged daughter of a co-worker. I believed her name was Shaniqua, and I don't remember much about her except she scared me. I'm grateful that our brains have good coping mechanisms that we can't control, because I can't remember any of the events leading up to this revelation. I'm certain my brain has blocked all those memories, but I remember this moment crystal clear. Surprisingly for my age at the time, I remembered it was nighttime, the bath before bed. My mother was downstairs on the phone. My sister had already had her bath, so it was my turn. My dad had run the water, tested it to make sure it was right, and I was standing in the bathroom wrapped in what seemed to be a huge towel. Just as I was getting into the tub, I started wiggling my butt, because what silly little girl doesn't find wiggling their butt hilarious? That's when the mood suddenly changed, and my dad told me that we needed to leave the tub, and he was suddenly serious. I was afraid I'd done something wrong. Maybe my booty shaking had made him mad. But I was just trying to be silly. I didn't mean to get into trouble. But I obeyed, and we got out the tub. He gently wrapped me in a towel and reassured me I'd done nothing wrong, but I needed to go downstairs to my mama. I was so confused. I had no clue what was going on. But since I knew I wasn't in trouble yet, my dad was so grave I knew something bad had happened. We went downstairs, Mama got off the phone, and that's when my dad told her, while he stood there with his hands gently placed on my shoulders. He gently told me to turn around while he unwrapped me from the towel, with my backside facing my mother. When I heard a gasp, she told the person on the phone that she needed to go, and then she didn't say anything for what seemed like an age. She asked my dad what happened, but he had no idea, and they started talking to me about it. My whole backside, especially my bottom, was black and blue. Someone had beaten a 4-year-old girl black and blue. After some discussion as to how this could have happened, we realized it must have been the babysitter. She had taken it upon herself to punish me when I wasn't doing what she thought I should be doing, or what she deemed bad. I can recall very few times my father being that angry. He didn't even have any words, just plain fury, but my mother had lots of them, and they were all directed to the babysitter and her mother. I don't know what she said to her, but I do know we never saw Shaniqua again. My parents didn't press charges, but they became very vigilant about their children. Only a year ago, my sister and I talked about the period of time when Shaniqua was our babysitter. She was mostly mine, but would watch my sister when she came home from kindergarten, and I told my sister I can hardly remember any of the times she watched us, and I remember my sister going slightly pale and telling me, "I can." I asked her if she was ever punished by Shaniqua like how I was, and my sister told me this exactly. No, she never beat me, but I remember when she would beat you. I remember her talking to you in the back room, and I remember hearing the wooden spoon hit your butt, and you crying. I'm sorry I never stood up for you. But it wasn't her fault. Moral of the story, be careful who you trust your children with.
Not our pizza. I almost didn't take the job. It came through a neighborhood Facebook group, one of those last-minute posts with just enough detail to feel legitimate and not enough to feel entirely comfortable. 2 kids, 1 night, parents heading to a work thing in Spokane. The pay was good. The house was on the outer edge of Coeur d'Alene, past where the streetlights thin out a bit and the trees start to press closer to the road. I said yes because I needed the money. I was young and I'd done it long enough to trust my read on people. The mom sounded organized. The dad asked the right kinds of questions. They weren't careless. Things like that matter more than you would think. The house sat back from the road behind a long gravel drive, pines on both sides. No neighbors close enough to see a porch light, let alone hear anything really. It wasn't super unusual for the area, but you do feel it when you step out of your car. The quiet has a weight to it. The kids were really easy. 1 boy and 1 girl, 8 and 5 respectively. The kind of siblings who argue in short bursts and then forget why they were mad. Their parents walked me through everything. Alarm system, doors, emergency contacts. They pointed out the basement access outside, too, almost as an aside. "Old house," the dad said. "There's a cellar door around the back. We keep it locked and you won't need it." He said it casually, but he still walked me to the back window and showed me where it was. 2 metal doors set into the ground like you see in some older places, the kind that open outward into a stairwell. It was dark out there already. The motion light flicked on when he stepped near the glass. "Sensor's a little sensitive," he said. "You'll notice." I did. After they left, the house settled into that evening rhythm. Cartoons, snacks, brushing teeth. I kept the TV low and moved through the rooms with that background awareness you get when you're responsible for any kids, let alone someone else's. Every sound registers, every shift in the light. Around 8:30, I checked the doors again. The front and back were locked, the garage was closed. The alarm was set to stay mode, just like they showed me. The woods beyond the backyard were just black. At 9, the kids were in bed. The girl asked if monsters could come out of the trees. I told her no in the way that you just tell kids no, firm enough that they can borrow your certainty. I stayed in the doorway until her breathing evened out. I was in the living room scrolling on my phone when the doorbell rang. I remember checking the time. 9:17. Not late enough to be too strange, but not early either. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. A guy stood there holding a pizza box in one of those insulated delivery bags. Mid-30s, maybe. Baseball cap, neutral expression. He looked like every other delivery driver I'd ever seen. I didn't open it right away. "Hello?" I said through the door. "Pizza delivery," he said. "Already paid." That part kind of landed weird with me. Already paid. I thought about it for a second. Parents ordering something as a courtesy wasn't weird. It actually felt like something thoughtful people would do. They'd mentioned dinner for the kids, but not for me. Maybe they had just handled it after they left. I opened the door, but I kept the chain on. "I think you've got the wrong house," I said. He shook his head and angled the box so I could see the receipt sticker. It had the address printed clearly. "Ordered about 40 minutes ago," he said. "Left instructions to just hand it off." He wasn't pushy. There was no urgency, just a guy doing his job. I closed the door and slid the chain off and opened it fully. He handed me the pizza. It was warm, smelled good. "Have a good night," he said. "Yeah, you too," I said. He walked back to his car. I watched him go through the side window, which I thought was kind of weird, but, people are people. It was a dark sedan with no obvious markings. At the time, it didn't really register as wrong or anything. I was just making note of it. A lot of places use personal vehicles. He drove off. I locked the door. I stood there for a second longer than necessary, holding the box. Something in my chest just felt wrong, like I'd missed a step going down the stairs. I took the pizza into the kitchen and set it on the counter. It was cheese and pepperoni, so pretty normal. I grabbed my phone and texted the mom. "Hey, thanks for the pizza. That was really nice of you." I got 3 dots almost immediately, then nothing, then 3 dots again. When the message came through, it was short. "We didn't order pizza." Before I could even process it, another message came in. "Lock every door. Take the kids upstairs. We've already called the cops. Do not open the door for anyone." The shift was immediate. My body caught up faster than my thoughts did. Adrenaline just hits like a switch, One second you're thinking about food and the next you're just moving. I didn't call out to the kids. I went straight to the stairs and moved fast but quiet. The house felt different already. The boy's door was cracked and he was still awake. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice level. "Sleep over in the other room tonight. Grab your blanket." He didn't question it. Kids pick up tone before content. I got the girl next. She was groggy, so I carried her. We went into the parents' bedroom at the end of the hall, and I locked the door behind us. There was a deadbolt on the inside, and I turned it. I moved the kids onto the bed and I told them we were playing a quiet game. No talking or getting up. They nodded. The boy watched me closely. He didn't know enough to know what was going on, but he knew enough to know that this was actually not a game at all. That was when I heard it. A dull, metallic sound from the back of the house. At this point, I called the cops myself because I had more information than the parents did. "Ma'am, what do you hear?" the operator said, once I'd caught her up. "Backyard," I said. "Something metal. The cellar doors." I moved to the window but stayed low. The angle didn't give me a clear view of the yard, just the edge of it. The motion light had not come on, which was strange to me. If someone was out there, they weren't crossing the sensor. They were already inside its range. Then there was another sound that was closer, like a scrape. The operator kept talking, asking small questions, keeping me anchored. I answered what I could. Time stretched in the way that it does when you're waiting for something to either happen or stop, and then headlights washed across the ceiling. Red and blue followed. I didn't move until I heard boots on gravel, doors opening, voices, real ones. A knock came from the front door first and loud and then announced, and then another knock closer to the back. I stayed where I was until my phone buzzed with a new message from the mom. "Police are there. They'll come inside. Stay upstairs until they get you." A few minutes later, I heard someone inside the house with heavy footsteps and very controlled movement calling out to me. "Police? Anyone upstairs?" I opened the bedroom door when they reached the top of the stairs. There were 2 officers and one stayed with us and the other went back down. They didn't say much right away, just enough to confirm that we were all right. It took about 20 minutes or so before anyone explained anything. They'd found him in the backyard. He was crouched near the cellar entrance, working at the lock. He had tools laid out on the ground, organized like he knew what he was doing. The motion light never triggered because he approached from the tree line at an angle that stayed outside its range until the last few feet. He kept low and moved slow. He knew exactly how far he could go without setting it off. The pizza wasn't from any place in town. The box was real, but the receipt was printed, but the number on it didn't connect to a working business. He'd brought it with him. The officer explained it like it was just another tactic. "It gets you to open the door," he said. "Makes you feel expected. Lowers your guard. He probably just went around the block and came back and then snuck toward the back, but if he did trip the light, you wouldn't have noticed, and after that he was already inside the range, so I don't know. You're lucky." He'd been watching the house. Weeks, they said. Learning the routine, when the lights went on, when they went off, when the parents left for work, how long they were gone. He picked a night when the schedule changed and somebody new was inside. Me. I thought about the moment at the door. I asked if he had tried the front door after, but the officer shook his head. "He didn't need to," he said. "Basement access is quieter, less visible. Gives him time." They walked me outside before I left, just so I could see. The cellar doors were scuffed around the edges. The lock had deep scratches in it. He'd been close. Close enough that another few minutes might have been enough. The pizza box was still on the kitchen counter when I went back in to grab my bag. The parents came back before I left. The mom hugged her kids hard. The dad talked to the officers in low, tight sentences. They both thanked me in a way that felt too big for what I'd done, because I didn't feel like I'd done anything. Had I not thanked them for the pizza, who knows what would have happened. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how normal it all felt right up until it didn't. A doorbell, a box, a simple assumption that made perfect sense at the time. It wasn't some wild, crazy thing. It was reasonable. And that's what almost let him in.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's collection of babysitter horror stories, a truly chilling collection, if I do say so myself. You gotta be careful who you leave your kids with. You never know. I know that in the UK there was an absolutely disturbing true story. I didn't want to make it into a story because it was just too much, but if you Google it, babysitter UK horror, it was a crime from like the 80s, 90s, maybe 70s, around then. You can see it for yourself. It is just too much. Seriously disturbing stuff. I would like to conclude this video by saying thank you to Raven, who joined us in tonight's video. Huge thank you, guys. Be sure to thank her in the comments too. Now, if you would like to hear more from this amazingly talented narrator, you can follow the links down below or on screen shortly to find out more. I would like to give one final thank you to, as always, my amazing members and patrons whose names you can see on screen. And if you would like even more cool exclusive content, you can follow the links down below to find out more. That's it from me. Hopefully I see you tomorrow for some exclusive and free night shift stories over on Patreon. Till next time, guys, stay awesome and good night.